Hello, and thank you for joining us. On behalf of UberEther, Yubico, Nok Nok, and Caresoft, I would like to welcome you to today's webinar, Phishing-Resistant Solutions, Modern Authentication for Executive Order Compliance. And at this time, I'm going to introduce our speakers for today. Matt Topper, President Solutions Catalyst with UberEther, Alex Antrim, Senior Solutions Engineer for Yubico, and Rolf Lindemann, VP of Products for Nok Nok. And Matt, the floor is yours.
Awesome. Thank you. So Rolf, if you want to go ahead and share out some of the slides. So today we're going to go over some of the really quite innovative pieces that the three companies here have built together to really change the way phishing-resistant credentials is able to be provided to both citizens as well as federal government employees, contractors, service members, as well as our partners across the world. So, Rolf, are you sharing yet? I'm not seeing it pop up. All right, well, let me see.
Sharing.
I'm not seeing it yet. Alex, is it coming through for you at all?
Yes, I can see it. Yeah, I see
Okay.
it. This way.
Well, I will just pretend like I can see it because we've done this a minute or two before. So if we just want to go to the phishing-resistant credentials are no longer optional slide. So about with executive order that was put out 2 years ago now, we called for stronger credentials for phishing resistance. And last year, Kay over at the FinCEN side of the world has said that there was over $300 million in fraud just with small and medium business banking going on here in the United States in the last year. And that was about a 300% increase from just 2 years previous to that. And a lot of that is because of the failures of strong authentication and identity proofing here within the United States for loans and business and all that funness. So that drove a lot of the executive order changes and requests where SMS, voice calls, one-time passcodes aren't no longer enough. And really, when you get into it, the only way to deploy phishing-resistant credentials is through either the FIDO2 protocol or through PKI certificates. And while we've got great ways to do PKI certificates for federal government employees and contractors, it's a little bit more difficult when we're dealing with citizens or even when we're starting to federate across borders and organizations today. So, Rolf, if we want to hit the challenges slide, the other major piece that we're seeing is I've been in the gray hat hacking community for a really long time. And within the last 2 years, the number of automated attacks that are out there, the amount of data that has been leaked and has been correlated by the attackers to be able to predict our passwords or be able to compromise the browsers or cell phone devices to get to the OTPs has just gone through the roof. There are man-in-the-middle proxies right now that can be purchased as a service for pennies on the dollar. It's truly insane how cheap and accessible this is to really kids that want to spend 15 minutes on the dark web at this point. And in the last year, it's more than doubled the amount of credential stuffing attacks that we've seen really hit hard home. So with that, Rolf, if you want to just move to slide 8 and hit that, I think we're going to show something that'll scare people.
My voice is my passport, verify me. Today, there truly are no more secrets. For about $50, I can replicate anyone's likeness and voice. I can easily pay the 18-year-old kid at Best Buy $500 to generate a new SIM for your cell phone. ChatGPT wrote me a script to take last week's list of over 3 billion compromised email addresses and passwords from Netflix, Gmail, Yahoo, Hotmail, LinkedIn, and over a dozen more, and combined it with the previous breaches from Facebook, LinkedIn, Capital One, and Anthem Blue Cross. I then filtered that data down to people in the DC area. I then screen scraped LinkedIn for people matching those names and locations to find government employees and contractors. I then provided ChatGPT with a list of the resulting government and contractor organizations and asked for the patterns for their email address. I could have just as easily scraped that data from sam.gov and found people in leadership positions in those organizations. Anyone want to bet what happens next? I did all of this in about 4 hours for less than $100.
Rolf, if you want to go ahead and pause, I know we're a little quick today, but needless to say, that was a recording. But it wasn't a recording I did. It was a recording that was generated by one of the many online tools that I didn't train it. I took conference videos and videos from webinars like this that are freely available on the web and threw that up and into the tool, and that full thing was generated. That entire script was generated based on input that I put into the tool. Sadly, all of the things I said about having that data and being able to correlate it in about 2-3 hours worth of time and be able to target very, very succinctly about 20,000 contractors within the federal government is reality of today. And even more so with some of the more recent leaks of Ticketmaster that just happened. Right now I know who your favorite band is and what concerts you go to, and might be able to fish you saying, hey, enter this contest for free concert tickets, and man in the middle use in some of those ways that are way easier. And I won't even go to the scariness of the 23andMe DNA data that's out there right now. But the more scary part is a lot of the attackers are taking that same data, and they know a lot of the people on those lists might have some good sense of cybersecurity provenance and figuring out how to better protect their own devices. But they also look at your family members in your household, because so many of us are working at home and are compromising corporate networks through our children's devices. They've also compromised the children or people's devices within the homes to then take over the home's routers and be able to reroute things directly there, or use your home router as a proxy to launch their own attacks. It has made it extremely difficult to really figure out who's behind the keyboard and where they're coming from, really in the world. So with that, we'll go to question number 1, and then I will turn it over to Rolf. All right, so question number 1 to get our credits for the day. Why are traditional credentials often considered vulnerable to phishing attacks? And we'll let folks go ahead and answer those. And Rolf, if you want to go ahead and get started on your section, let's roll.
Sure. So that was a challenge. Now let's see how FIDO addresses that. And you might have heard about FIDO lines and passkeys. That FIDO lines was founded by 6 members, including Nok Nok, roughly 12 years ago now. It's a long time. And we were working hard behind the scenes to make phishing-resistant credentials a reality. So we worked on specifications and then got that in all the platforms. And not going into a lot of those details, but at least I want to focus on the way FIDO protects against phishing. Now let's look into how phishing works today. So typically there's a man in the middle, as a phisher, that sends out an email to get people on a phishing site. So the user opens a web browser, thinks they go to relyingparty.com, but in the end, the user really, or the browser is really loading data from maninthemiddle.com through various methods. And now the user enters usernames, passwords, OTP, doesn't matter. It's all sent to the min in the middle and then to the relying party. And the challenge here really, or it's really 2 challenges. The first is the fake site looks legitimate to the user. There's no way to differentiate the real website from the fake website because it's just pixels, right? Like images, and the content is copied from the real website in real time. So there's no way for the user to understand that they are interacting with a phishing site. Now the user enters all the secrets, and sure enough, those secrets end up as a relying party, and that is challenge number 2 for the relying party that looks like a legitimate user because the username is correct, the password is correct, and the OTP is correct. So it's even done MFA, the traditional legacy MFA, and even if you would add device fingerprinting and all these kind of data, right, the user sends, or the browser of the user sends that data over to the man in the middle, so the man in the middle can collect that data. It's not really a secret. So the relying party won't see the difference between the real user, very similar to the real user not seeing the difference between the relying party and the man in the middle. So that's, in a nutshell, today's issue. And whatever we do with out-of-band authentication doesn't really address that problem. Our existing MFA methods are not good enough. And FIDO works differently. So in FIDO case, there's a challenge sent from the relying party that invokes the FIDO stack on the client side. And the main difference here is that the URL from that relying party is available in the browser. So it's nothing the user really sees or pays attention to, but the browser needs to understand what server names are, and they already do. And so this kind of verifier name resistance or name binding, that is the approach we use in FIDO all the time. So the FIDO stack on the client side would then ask for the relyingparty.com keys if it's really the relyingparty.com, or would ask for maninthemiddle.com keys to be used for the authentication. But in any event, the private key would not be given to anyone, right? Especially not the man in the middle, because it's only the signed response that would be sent over to the relying party. So in the end, the man in the middle doesn't know the user's private key, so the relying party, the man in the middle cannot impersonate the user going forward. And in that specific situation, the user cannot be impersonated because the browser would use different keys, right? Depending on the website that the browser really sees as a relying party. So for that reason, FIDO is one of the few ways and the only scalable method of authentication that is phishing resistant today. And that is one of the big differentiators and really helps us with that. So what are the key benefits of FIDO credentials just beyond the phishing resistance? And that's more to it. If you remember, in the case of PIF credentials, there is modules you have to install, client-side software like PKCS11 modules on Windows devices. There's readers you might need for making it work with mobile devices. But in the FIDO case, that's all there. It's all natively supported by the platforms, by the existing browsers you have today, because it has been made compatible with the way browsers interact with the web and with the security model of those web systems. So there's nothing to install. It's compatible with all mobile devices and desktop devices, and it supports remote onboarding as well. From that perspective, you really can create a derived credential from a PIF, meaning take the PIF as the original credential and derive the FIDO credential off of that. And now you have phishing-resistant authentication that works without installation of third-party software, even on mobile devices, and that enables way more use cases that people can have today. It also supports a bring your own authenticator model through a concept called authenticator attestation. So if I get my security key from an e-commerce vendor, the relying party might still be able to find out that this is a FIPS certified security key that meets all AAL3 requirements in the end. And dedicated security keys are an option. They are not mandatory to use, but in the high security case, that is the best situation you have. And it provides scalable security up to AAL3. And that is the highest security level, which is defined here. And that is great that we have a FIDO authentication method that really scales all up to the highest security level and scales globally in terms of broad adoption, right? So it's supported by all the platforms and can be used for any use case. So what does it mean for the user? It is providing simple and secure authentication in a single step, right? So it's not the traditional two-factor means two-step verification where you have to enter the password first and then the OTP second. It is a single step for the user because you just inject your security key, type the client pin to that, or you just swipe your finger on your mobile device. For the user, it's one gesture to do, and it provides two-factor authentication because the possession factor, the key which is included in the authenticator, is that second part that's unlocked by the user's gesture. Right? The relying party just verifies the key, and that gives you the simple phishing-resistant MFA. It works with security keys and platform authenticators, which again is another way to scale to different use cases where you have the high security use case or the more scalable one with potentially even citizens on the other side. The NIST 863 defines several authenticator types like single-factor cryptographic devices or multi-factor cryptographic software, and also defines a maximum authentication assurance level that can be achieved. Right, with a single-factor cryptographic device on its own, it's AL1. If you combine it with a memorized secret, you might end up with AL3. But then again, it's more as two-step verification, where yes, you can also use a FIDO security key for that with just the user presence of that, meaning a user presses the button of the security key as opposed to entering a PIN. But the most likely use case is really getting to AL2. For example, using FIDO platform authenticators or sync passkeys or device-bound passkeys going forward, which gives you to AL2, where you have to also verify the user intent to authenticate, right? The authentication intent by the user, which is typically indicated in the FIDO world and can be verified as well. Or if you have the high security use case, which we are talking about today mostly, right? This is the AL3, where you need cryptographic hardware like a security key, where you have user verification as a separate option, right? Typically with a client pin that needs to be entered. And there's a requirement for FIPS certification overall level 2 and physical level 3 if those are purchased by the government agencies. But those things can be verified, and we will show how that works in reality. Few words on Nok Nok. So we are one of the founders of the FIDO Alliance, invented that passwordless FIDO protocol, and actually I'm one of the co-authors of that, and our thought leader with very many proven deployments we have in the world with using FIDO phishing-resistant authentication on many different levels. It's really the most widely deployed passwordless solution as of today, with hundreds of millions of deployed users. And it is a proven technology with innovations based on real-world experience that we have with all the customers we have deployed globally, and a broad portfolio, backed by a broad portfolio of patents that we have for all the different additions we have done, right? The ways we implement FIDO to make it really practical and scale. So what are the use cases we support? We typically talk about the 5 different dimensions of that. First, it's different modalities. And that is something we learned. It's not about what is the best modality. In the end, it's about what modality do users prefer. Right? There are sometimes limitations of what you can do, especially in security keys, but even there we have the ability for biometric user verification as well, where fingerprints work on platform authenticators with sync passkeys. There is more flexibilities. There are users that prefer facial recognition, other users prefer fingerprint, and they can buy the respective devices, which makes it easy. So again, it's not about the best modality. It's in the end about the best modality for a specific user. It's about user preferences to make sure that the user accepts those modalities. The second thing is about the clients. Any clients like native apps, mobile browsers, desktop browsers, smartwatches, even, to make sure that those clients can be used in practice, and it's not limited to just browsers on specific devices or even specific browser versions which need plugins potentially. Second, or the third one is really form factors. So we support roaming authenticators like the security keys, which could be USB tokens, could be BLE, could be NFC support, depending on the environmental situation. There are typically pros and cons for the various form factors, and of course, platform authenticators, which especially in the citizen use case make a lot of sense. And then second last one is any assurance level, right? If you need AAL1, AAL2, or even AAL3, those can be enforced by simple configuration in the system. And that is one of the real benefits, to make it easy to define the user journey on the back end and also understand what kind of security guarantees you get from that. And the last one is really, what is the authentication target? In most cases, we will likely talk about servers, cloud servers where you authenticate to, but it could also be IoT devices or even call centers, where today really the authentication that you have available is knowledge-based questions, right? So what's your mother's maiden name, this kind of thing, or what's your birth date, to then try to understand who the user could be. But that's easily faked, right? Especially now with all the deep fakes and the modern AI systems. So one thing to really emphasize here is the ability in the policy engine to enforce different rules. And the one example I want to show here is for the high security case, right? You might need a AL3 level, meaning FIPS level 2 certified security keys with physical level 3, right? Those are the characteristics you can easily define in our rules engine to make sure that you can use the existing attestation method that is supported by those security keys and require those before letting in the user. And you see, it's not only about the FIP certification, you can also and need to verify that you got the attestation, you have the user verification as well, right? It's also a fresh user verification to really meet the FIPS should requirement on the authentication intent from the user. And you might want to enforce that's a device-bound passkey as well. So those things are very can be defined on a very granular level to make it very easy to support that over time, and for different rules, define different rules for different use cases. For example, the high security case on the one hand side, or the citizen authentication use case for AAL2, which would look a little differently. So, which brings us to our second question. Before I can continue to go into the use cases a little deeper. Okay. Thanks for that. So talking about solutions and benefits here, government use cases we have. So employee single sign-on might be the use case that is most dominant or on everyone's mind. But there's also supplier access. Contractors, partners need to access agency systems. And there's a big one, the citizen accessing publicly facing government services. And that is really a use case where PIF cards do not apply at all, and where I think you can get best benefits from a FIDO-based authentication, meaning phishing resistance, but also the practicality of using that authentication, right? It's really practical for consumers to use, and that has been shown by many large-scale deployments from mobile network operators to banks to e-commerce vendors these days to show that it's practical to ask consumers to use this kind of authentication method and have phishing-resistant authentication as a result of that. So one statistic here, there's typically hesitance in citizens to interact digitally with the government, especially to share more data with the government. So we think that this privacy-friendly FIDO authentication, which does not send over biometric data to the government, is a very good way to convince citizens that this is a customer-friendly one. It's protecting the user's privacy, but at the same time also provides the security level that people expect from a government interaction. And so we think FIDO is really the most practical phishing-resistant authentication option for citizens going forward. And that is one of the big benefits, right? If you have to provide that option of phishing-resistant authentication to citizens, this is the right way to do so. The process would be create users without the PIF card, right? Non-PIF digital identity records, apply ID proofing to know what user it really is, to then trigger the FIDO process, which is just defined on the right-hand side, meaning the user provides the authenticator. It's typically not a government purchased one or an agency purchased authenticator. Could be platform or authenticator or a security key, whatever the user prefers. Then trigger the credential creation by that user, which is really derived credential from that identity verified by the proofing process, and then verify the credential attestation to determine the security level, what you got, whether you got the user verification, which is mandatory, like the authentication intent. Right, this is the process for citizens, very simple and scalable and phishing resistant at the same time. Very great combination. Last thing is, for me, is really benefits for employees and contractors. There are different requirements depending on what kind of assurance level you want to achieve. So could be starting with AL2 authenticators being procured by the federal government agency, for example, platform authenticators on government issued mobile phones with FIPS validated crypto, or bring your own authenticator with any platform authenticator, any security key in both cases, where we use attestation to verify the security characteristics at registration time, and could even have pre-registered FIDO credentials in the case of security keys. If you look at the AL3, the options, the practical options really are reduced. So the security key is that the option, it's the way to go. And that's the reason why we have Yubico on the call today to get into more details of that. I think that's 2 more slides for that before. One thing beforehand, authenticators are available in multiple form factors. You see some examples here, the typical USB form factors or security key thing, but also it is possible to embed FIDO authenticators into smart card form factors. We have seen smart rings supporting and implementing FIDO authenticators. So there are many options which can be really targeted to very specific use cases to make it very practical. And there are FIPS certified security key, which exists today. Some examples are given here. And deployment in this case is really PIF sign-in, allow or suggest the FIDO process if users already have a PIF. If they do not have one, create the non-PIF digital identity record, determine PIF eligibility, find the sponsor, in-person proofing, biometric capture needs to be triggered, and then triggers the FIDO process. And then if the user is PIF eligible, right, triggers the PIF process or promote the pre-PIF FIDO to derived PIF conversion. Right? If you look into more or want to see more details, there's a white paper we have published with the FIDO Alliance, that guidance for US government agency deployment of FIDO authentication, which goes into more detail than we can show here, where the FIDO process alternatives are really traditional method, meaning online FIDO registration before the user then can use the FIDO credential for authentication. So meaning you create the FIDO credential online and triggered by the user, or there are new methods as well, pre-registered FIDO credentials on security keys, or the online FIDO registration with enterprise attestation, which even gives you more ability to do inventory tracking of security keys, but obviously require minimum volumes, but get growing support for that. With that, we are at question number 3, and then I hand over to Alex.
Okay, thanks, Rolf. Hopefully everybody had a chance to answer that question. We can move on to the next slide, please. All right, next slide. So for this portion of the presentation, we don't need to go deep on what a FIDO credential is, especially since Rolf gave us all that great information, but it's important to understand that passkeys are the credentials themselves. and passkeys live inside an authenticator or inside a platform. And so said another way, the passkey should not be confused with the authenticator itself. That authenticator is the device that holds the credentials, secures the PIN, and the attestation certificates that were mentioned earlier, and really facilitates authentication. Next slide, please. So separating out passkey credentials into two classes, we have syncable passkeys and we have device-bound passkeys. Now, syncable passkeys, you can use the cloud to sync them across multiple devices, whereas a device-bound passkey, as it's stated, is on hardware, like a security key or other type of device. And it's really tying that single credential to one piece of hardware. Now, a lot of times when passkeys are mentioned online or in discussions and blog posts, it may be implied to mean a certain type of passkey, usually synced passkeys. Now, these synced passkeys are becoming very popular and commonplace, in ecosystems like the Apple, Google environments, especially for consumer applications. And it allows a passkey to be registered on one of your devices and then stored within your platform provider. It's then synced to all of your other, say Apple or Google devices via that platform. This makes your passkey credentials synced and highly available and ready to use across all of your devices when you're assigned into your provider. And it also provides a level of recovery if you happen to lose one of your devices. There are other types of syncable passkey solutions that are managed by third-party passkey providers, but we're not going to be talking about those today. The other class of passkey is a device-bound passkey. This type of passkey does not sync or get copied to another device. A well-known example of this are passkeys that live on FIDO2 security keys. Another popular form of platform credentials like those created on Windows platform and persist in a TPM using Windows Hello. But you can even separate out device-bound passkeys further into two categories. You have device-bound passkeys general purpose. Those live in general purpose devices such as smartphones, tablets, workstations, and that's a middle ground option for enterprises. It's less secure than device-bound passkeys, like on hardware security keys, but it can meet AAL2, like Rolf mentioned earlier. Then the other kind of category under device-bound passkeys are device-bound passkeys that are on devices purpose-built for security, and they live in that security key, and they're separate from the everyday devices. Now, this is the best option, in our opinion, for enterprises. They meet that highest security and compliance assurance of AAL3. Now, comparing the two, our stance for the organization is that device-bound passkeys provide the best basic controls that organizations need to properly manage or secure the lifecycle of a passkey. Now, those syncable passkeys are great solutions for many low-risk consumers and low-risk applications, but they are considered lower assurance. Those syncable passkey solutions are hands down better than a password-based authentication, but again, generally are not really suitable for that enterprise. The availability gains that are provided by those synced passkeys are outweighed by the security management, the user experience, and some concerns that are added when using them in your environment. And with syncable passkeys, it can become difficult for enterprises to audit and prove how passkeys are being synced or shared, and to know which copy is being used. It's difficult to support users that can't sign in with their passkey or when they need help with recovery. And it's difficult to manage the lifecycle of a passkey after it's been created. Cloned passkeys that are shared are indistinguishable from the original, and they can't be unshared. And then synced passkeys do not really include that existing attestation that was generated when first registering a passkey on a device-bound authenticator. Next slide, please, Rolf. So now we're going to be talking about some enhancements to the firmware of security of our security keys. Next slide, Rolf. Before going into the FIDO2 focused firmware upgrades, I just wanted to highlight a key update to the PIV module. So the 5.7 enhancements for the PIV application on the YubiKey, they received new supported key types. And this was to accommodate not only to accommodate the August 2023 DoD memo on stronger public key algorithms by supporting those RSA 3072 and RSA 4096, but it's also adding new key types for organizations that need them. The PIV application now supports advanced key management functions such as move and delete PIV keys for organizations that need that additional flexibility. These larger key sizes are being evaluated across the Department of Defense and federal government to support post-quantum computing attacks on systems and services that are protected by PKI. Next slide. Okay, so now let's get back to the FIDO2 enhancements. So, passwordless is rapidly becoming the end goal for organizations and agencies, and passwordless in combination with PINs are meet the best security. Passwords are considered something that you know when using those factors. However, PINs can be exposed when passed along networks to be validated by an online or backend validation service. PINs, on the other hand, are only used to unlock the stored credentials on an authenticator. So they're only operating at that machine layer. And unlocking operations only occur at the machine layer between the authenticator and the host machine. And we'll cover some additional PIN capabilities in the next few slides. Next slide. But those PIV enhancements and talking about passwordless are really only a small part of these upgrades. Next slide. So when organizations are planning to adopt modern authentication, there are still some enforcement and tracking requirements that should be addressed. Making sure you understand where all your authenticators are in your environment, especially in a globally dispersed organization, is important to a scalable deployment. And so to plan for those scalable deployments, organizations can now leverage the new FIDO2 firmware upgrades to relieve some of those manual labor efforts when scaling out an authentication deployment. Next slide, please, Rolf. So before talking about the new enhancements for enterprise attestation, I just wanted to discuss attestation in a general sense. So as Rolf was talking about earlier, that device attestation provides organizations proof or assurance that the private key was generated directly on a device. Attestation is not possible when importing key materials using other additional tooling and importing those into modules onto a device. Now, that general device attestation does not necessarily provide unique identifiers of the device or the issuer of the credential to the relying party, but it does offer other information like the manufacturer and the capabilities of the device itself. Next slide, please. So enterprise attestation certificates are generated directly onto an authenticator and provide that cryptographic proof that the authenticator created and controls the credential. And device attestation is only available for those device-bound authenticators. Now, enterprise attestation is available on custom program keys to allow identity providers to read the serial number or another unique identifier from the security key during FIDO2 registration. This satisfies a variety of asset tracking requirements and really can aid in account recovery flows by allowing an end user to prove they have a specific FIDO2 device that's been evaluated, tested, and approved for that organization. Next slide. Now, for enterprises, PIN complexity is now available. And when enabled, it's off by default in our new firmware, but it'll apply to all of the applications that are on a YubiKey that rely on PINs, including FIDO2, PIV, and even OpenPGP. That PIN complexity ensures that organizations are prepared for the upcoming requirements from NIST and other corporate compliance mandates by blocking the simple patterns, as well as a static list of common PINs. I'm sure we've all seen or heard stories of individuals that have been reusing PINs or using PINs that they recognize on a regular basis, but that might not meet the necessary PIN complexity requirements of an organization. So now organizations can rest easy knowing that their users can't use an easy-to-guess PIN with rules enforced specifically at the hardware level. Next slide, please. Now, the FIDO Alliance continues to improve the CTAP, or Client to Authenticator Protocol, CTAP, that governs the communication between security keys and the devices. Our 5.7 firmware implements the latest version of the protocol, CTAP 2.1, which brings a number of improvements around the FIDO2 PIN specifically. Forced PIN change supports that FIDO pre-registration that Rolf mentioned earlier, as well as other enroll on behalf of scenarios by ensuring that the temporary PIN that is set during an organization's FIDO2 enrollment are changed by the user before the security key can be used. Minimum PIN length also addresses PIN requirements for self-service enrollments by allowing organizations to configure a minimum PIN length on the YubiKey or other security key and allowing specific requirements to report the currently configured minimum PIN length. Next slide, please. One more thing that we did specifically, we developed a library an in-house library that performs the underlying cryptographic operations for decryption, signing, etc., for RSA and ECC, and that'll be included in our 5.7 upgrade as well. Next slide, please. So just a quick snapshot of the various product lines when you're looking at security keys. The YubiKey 5 series supports all of the authentication protocols, as well as the enhancements from the new 5.7 firmware. But the security key series lines is split into a consumer model and an enterprise edition. And these both only support the FIDO2 WebAuthn and U2F. But the enterprise edition adds the enforcement for pin usage, like forced pin change and minimum pin length. And both of these are attractive capabilities for organization level management and deployment. Next slide, please, Rolf. And lastly, we just wanted to highlight that you can now store even more credentials on the YubiKey 5 series. Frequent users of passkeys and OAuth one-time passwords now have a reason to celebrate with the expansion of the storage for both FIDO2 discoverable credentials, passkeys, and OAuth. So now there are 100 passkey and 64 OAuth slots available. Those can accommodate an individual's authentication needs for many years to come. As before, all storage limits are per application, so users can have up to 100 passkeys, 24 PIV certificates, 64 OAuth seeds, and 2 customizable OTP slots for a total of 190 credentials. All right, enough talking about security keys. I'll turn it back over to Rolf to finish this up. Thanks. Oh, sorry, Matt.
All righty, so needless to say, a lot going on with phishing-resistant credentials and some great updates from Yubico. I know a lot of our federal customers are extremely happy to see the enterprise attestation credential capabilities, and when you pair it with a server-side product like Nok Nok, really able to start delivering some not only great citizen experiences, but also enterprise. We've got some customer starting pilots now that, especially with work from home capabilities, are essentially shipping enterprise attested keys with the pin, or I'm sorry, shipping the keys to their employees within the boxes when they're sending out the laptops, and then first day having their managers, the person's manager, jump on and provide them the pin to register and then gain access, because they might not actually be at a PIV or CAC facility for months, if ever in some cases. Some temporary workers, they're looking at maybe not ever giving them. So really some great enablers there. And one of the ways we help our customers do that is through partnerships with Yubico and Nok Nok, and providing that in a FedRAMP high as well as DoD Impact Level 5 managed environment. So a lot of those nuances, use cases, specialized configurations that have to be best practices for the federal government, UberEther will install, configure, manage, and maintain that for you fresh and out of the box without you having to worry about that time over time. And as new crypto libraries get released, as new guidance, we update those libraries and flows to make sure that you are following them and up to date. So the nice part about this combined solution is, Rolf, if we go to the next page, is that from day one, all of the keys in this environment are controlled by you. So every root key for your tenant account, where these are installed, configured, managed, maintained on your behalf, is managed by you and your agency. Truly a private tenant shared nothing environment, which greatly mitigates a lot of the attack on the identity and access management systems that we're seeing today. And there is no real jackpot scenario if someone was to break into the back end, because they would have to essentially break into your side and steal the root keys, or go through the cost and time to decrypt and get to them. So something way different than what we see a lot in the traditional SaaS provider world, and something that for us that have built for the Department of Defense, intelligence community, Homeland Security for the last 20 years, thought was important in bringing a solution like this to bear. So Rolf, if you'll hit the next slide. the biggest differentiator that we see, and what I keep trying to remind people about, is a lot of the solutions today that provide FIDO credentials, or at least the server-side management of those credentials, are vendor locked in and extremely hard to move and migrate to a new solution. A lot of the providers on this screen, if you want to move away from, you're going to have to re-enroll all of your users. And you're not able to move the keys to a new provider easily. And for those of us that have been doing PKI long enough, we remember those times when you would buy a CA, certificate authority vendor, and register your keys with them. And after 3 years, you want to move to a new vendor, and they go, "That's great, but there's no way to escrow those keys to that new vendor, so you're going to have to keep paying us for the next 10 years anyways." And we all kind of went, "Oh, shoot." There's a lot of that same behavior happening within FIDO, which is one of the reasons we did partner with Nok Nok, because it does let you lift and shift those keys if you did have a reason to move them later, or also move them across networks or into disconnected environments to have those pre-reg before you even show up. So Nok Nok also allows us to bridge all of these pieces. One of the biggest things we see in the market right now is identity resiliency. And by going to a single provider solution and having those keys locked in, if that provider goes offline, what happens? You can't log in anymore. And your entire organization is at a standstill until that provider fixes themselves. Or a lot of these providers have a shared responsibility that the customers are responsible for the backup and recovery of sometimes the entire directory of users, not just the individual accounts. And that is a major risk if even your individual tenants were to get compromised, that not a lot of people realize as they sign up for these solutions. So with Nok Nok, we can mitigate that by providing a highly distributed, highly available environment that can also be staged in multiple cloud providers at the same time, where some of the other providers may fall down. So with that, if you go to the next slide, Rolf, another benefit and advantage that we're adding on our IAM Advantage platform is additional contextual-based controls. As we start seeing, or have started seeing, I won't say as we start, we're seeing it pretty darn actively right now. More and more compromised credentials showing up, more and more credential stuffing attacks, and also deep fakes of people trying to prove and validate their identities. We've built a user behavior analytics tool that sits on top of the requests and provides additional context on the user's logins, behaviors, activity patterns. Some of the behavior flows that you'll see here are quite powerful, because right, we all know people tend to move between pages in a specific order. And if you start skipping those pages and going directly to resources that no one ever has done before, we see those outliers pretty darn quick. Simple things that we saw with one of our customers was they had another MFA solution that they had integrated as part of password resets. And the integrator that had done that on their behalf didn't do the best job at coding that. And an attacker had found a way to bypass the self-service password reset second factors, and were able to reset the password for anyone in the organization at any given time. Well, we quickly found that that middle page was being bypassed for the MFA validation of the user before they got to the reset screen, and called it out of, "Hey, what just happened here? That should never happen." So some really strong capabilities that we've added, as well as a 360-degree view into ITDR by integrating into your existing SIM tools and having your SOC analyst be able to say, "That session looks risky. Let's disable that account. Let's disable their active VPN or zero trust client session. And let's revoke all of the cookies in the browser for that user's sessions." And maybe we lock them out. Maybe we force them to re-authenticate and raise their risk to a level where they do have to do an identity proof before they get back in. A lot more features and capabilities around that. And then the other benefit here is, if we go to the next slide, Rolf, is that the time to value. Oops, I think I lost that share, but I will say, when we're seeing a lot of deployments being done with government customers, they're taking 12 to 18 months to get through the ATO process, get through the approvals, get things up and online and available. And that's obviously an issue. We need to move faster than that to meet some of the zero trust requirements through the next 2-3 years. With our IAM Advantage solution, we're seeing customers get up online, joiner mover leavers, integrating with Nok Nok and Yubico to provide phishing-resistant credentials in weeks. And that is fully ATO'd because of the inheritance to be gained from our FedRAMP High and DoD IL5 existing accreditations. It allows you to really move quickly and provide these services. And then last slide before we wrap up, more than just the Yubico and Nok Nok pieces, we've also integrated other market-leading vendor products together to work from beginning to end. So we talked a little bit about the joiner mover leaver flows that for people onboarding with their new computers. We've integrated that capability into SailPoint, so that SailPoint will read from your HR system, see a person's start date, automatically alert the teams that are doing the distribution of your computers to employees across the organization, put that YubiKey in the box, tie it to their machine, and then on the person's first day, we'll send the PIN to their manager with the instructions on how to validate their identity on Zoom before they give that PIN to them to register to their account. So, right, then you've got register to the account, authenticate with a YubiKey, utilizing Nok Nok, and then using something like Ping Federate to go ahead and authorize those users to all their internal resources on their first day. Same thing on account deactivation, joiners, movers, leavers, also integrating that in with CyberArk, Beyond Trust for privileged user management, and then, as I said, 360-degree ITDR capabilities with OpenSearch and the user behavior analytic tools we've brought in. So with that, the next slide, Rolf mentioned earlier the FIDO Alliance white paper. Please feel free to reach out to us at UberEther at hello@UberEther. Very heavily tailored, Rolf, if you want to hit the next slide, to the federal government and best practices for rolling those things out. Obviously, here at UberEther, we can help you get those up and running in days rather than having to read through the paper and try and figure out what's there on your own. And then, Rolf, if you hit the next slide, if anyone has any questions, here's the contact information for all of us on today's call. And the Caresoft team will also be reaching out to you for additional follow-up. So with that, we'll open up the floor to any questions. I know we've answered 3 or 4 of them throughout today's discussion. So Alex, I know at Yubico, you guys have launched the enterprise attestation, or I'm sorry, the enterprise delivery capabilities for customers. Can you explain a little more about that and how that can tie into a federal government space?
Sure. So we do have our a couple different procurement models, and included in the subscription service, we have an enterprise delivery capability. We can work with with your IDP and other services or components within your organization to set up integrations to our delivery service so that end users or employees can quickly go into an inventory, a preset procured inventory of certain makes and models of YubiKeys, and select the ones that are have been approved for their use, and enter in some quick shipping information, and then very quickly receive a single blister pack or multiple blister packs of YubiKeys directly to their to their door. And then those can be facilitated with either a self-service enrollment, a FIDO pre-registration, et cetera. So we're really trying to take out some of the logistics challenges from an organization, provide those services directly from our factory and programming stations to really meet MFA day one. Right, day one, second one. That's really the goal of any organization, ensuring that, you know, all those, what are those terms, Matt? The movers, the joiners, you know, all those, there's a lot of churn of individuals, and how can an organization leverage enterprise delivery or Yubico enterprise delivery to facilitate those MFA requirements on day one, regardless of when that person joined or as they're leaving, et cetera. Oh, yep.
It's been great to actually see customers never have to issue users passwords ever, like not even on day one. So there's nothing to forget or nothing to terribly set. Rolf, just one more question before we wrap up here. What's next from the FIDO Alliance in terms of standards updates, maybe new standards profiles, and then with that, Nok Nok in your next release?
Okay, very good question. So FIDO line side, you might have seen in my screenshot already. So FIDO metadata service now folds in the FIPS certification status. So if people have seen that webinar before, there was a list of AAG IDs you had to maintain beforehand. Now you don't have to do that. You can just ask for FIPS certified security keys, make that a requirement. We get that out of the FIDO metadata system. So that's one of the new things. Which we get out of there. Then there's a bunch of updates we do to the CTAP protocol as well, and on the web authentication side and the passkey side, lots of discussions about different types of keys. Essentially, we mentioned the synced passkeys already, and passkeys typically are freely exportable, importable, which is fine with AL2. But some people would like to see passkeys that are locked into a specific provider and cannot leave that provider. They might be synced to different machines, but not to different providers. So those provider scope keys are being folded into the web authentication specification, and the device-bound keys are there as well. So all good things. We hope that the platforms will adopt those new capabilities of the protocols very, very soon. And obviously, Nok Nok is prepared to support all those in our platform. And we make it very easy to consume all that, to support enterprise attestation today, and all the other methods to really have a practical FIDO deployment that works in reality.
Yeah, one of the things that watching the specs I've been super interested, right, is we've got the idea of kind of transparent keys that you can read, and you don't have to actually show that, like basically you don't have to prompt the user for them. But I think transparent device keys are going to be very, very interesting, especially in places where you've got like a help desk floor or a call center where people are moving between machines every single day, and just whatever spot's open, when they authenticate, you can say, yeah, I've seen this machine before. I know it's physically deployed into our call center. This might be the first time Matt's sitting down at it, but you can really identify the device separately from the human, and then also put keys that bind the two together. And